Well, good morning and welcome to Saturday, the 17th of July. This is our last day this week with John Stott going through the book of Romans. Been really powerful. Sit down and read the book of Romans. Read it a couple times this summer. Try different translations of it just to get a different sense of some of the passages. It's a rich book. I'm not really sure why I've not preached through the whole book in my ministry, other than it is so deep. And it would, again, folks at JCPM would not think I was kidding if I said it might take a few years to get through it, for me anyway. So it's Saturday, it's July the 17th, our last day in Romans with John Stott. The Devo is entitled The Weak and the Strong. The Weak and the Strong. And the suggested reading is Romans 15. Romans 15, 1 through 13. The lead-in verse, however, comes from the previous chapter, Romans 14, verse 1. Accept him whose faith is weak, without passing judgment on disputable matters. Accept him whose faith is weak, without passing judgment on disputable matters. Our relationship with the weak is the one Paul treats at greatest length. Interesting, isn't it? That's all the way from chapter 14, verse 1 through to chapter 15, verse 13. They are evidently weak in faith or conviction rather than in will or character. So if we are trying to picture a weaker brother or sister, we must envisage not a vulnerable Christian easily overcome by temptation, but a sensitive Christian, full of indecision and scruples. What the weak lack is not strength of self-control, but liberty of conscience. The weak in Rome must have been mainly Jewish Christians who believed they should still observe both the food laws and the feasts and fasts of the Jewish calendar. Paul himself was one of the strong and identifies with their position. His educated conscience assures him that foods and days are matters of secondary importance. At the same time, he refuses to ride roughshod over the sensitive consciences of the weak. His overall exhortation to the church is to accept the weak as God has done, chapter 14, verses 1 and 3, and to accept one another as Christ has done, chapter 15, verse 7. The strong must not despise, browbeat, or condemn the weak, or damage them by persuading them to act against their conscience. The most notable feature of Paul's instructions is that he grounds them on his Christology, and in particular on the death, resurrection, and parousia of Jesus, his coming, his return. The weak are brothers and sisters for whom Christ died. Christ rose to be their Lord, and we have no right to interfere with his servants. He is also coming to be our judge, so we should not play the role of judge ourselves. We should also follow the example of Christ, who did not please himself, but became a servant, indeed, a servant of both Jews and Gentiles. So Paul leaves his readers with a beautiful vision of the weak and the strong, Jewish believers and Gentile believers, who are bound together by such a spirit of unity that with one heart and mouth they might glorify God together. Verse 6. I am fully persuaded that this passage and the teachings of this passage were completely, in some cases, completely overlooked, not focused on during our time of pandemic, when political things got in the way of everything, even all the way down to wearing a mask. If Paul had been writing Romans in these days, he would not have talked about meat sacrifice to idols as the issue between stronger and weaker brothers. I believe he would have used mask wearing. That's presumptuous on my part, of course, but I just know from personal experience with one good brother of mine, doesn't live around here, who refused to go to church because the church was asking attenders to wear a mask. He broke fellowship with other believers over a mask. Paul certainly would say, hey, Christ died for all of us, so treat each other that way. Whether it's something that you feel you must do or whether you feel the freedom not to do, still respect each other. Still identify with each other as fellow believers in Christ. A lot of things happened over the last 18 months to break this kind of fellowship where we are considerate of each other and respect each other, not for having differences of opinion on the cross, on the resurrection, on salvation by Christ alone, but on side issues, as the church seems to have found a way to do through its history. About baptism, about speaking in tongues, about women in the church, about so many other things that do not have anything to do with the central core powerful truth of the gospel. And surely, wearing a mask and other issues that surrounded the meeting place of medical and political tore this country apart, but more sadly tore the church apart in many places and in many ways. Fellowship broken. Be considerate of one another. If you believe about yourself that you hold a stronger position, Paul says, than you take regard for those who you think are weaker than. Serve them. Show them love. And if you think you're on the other side of that mix, the same goes the other direction. Oh, let's humble ourselves with each other. Let's be diligent to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Blessings to you today.